Okay, so again, welcome back to Nerav Rom and the show on the Parsha and Parshas Chukas. Again, so many topics. We're going to try to connect two. We'll try to see how they work. We'll start off with a very tiny little Parsha that we find in here. I have to set the scene. After Aaron HaKohen died, so it says that the Anane Kovod, that these clouds which protected Am Yisrael in the Midbar, basically total climate control, totally everything. They were able to go comfortably through the Midbar, men, women, children, old people, young people. They disappeared because they came to the schus of Aaron. Later, Moshe Rabbeinu brought them back in his schus, but there was a period of time, right? Imagine how we cry if the air conditioning goes out. Here you're in the middle of the desert and you're on the covered go out. That's really bad. And, right, because it was also a sign of their protection. So, Vayishma HaKnani Melech Arad Yoshev HaNegev. We get trouble from the Knanim in the Negev, who Rashi says are Amalek. And when they hear that we're exposed like that, right, Ki bo Yisrael derech ha'atarim, right, they heard that Am Yisrael came by their area, and then Vayilochem b'Yisrael, they fought Am Yisrael, Vayish mimenu shevi. And they took a captive. Okay, now I said captive singular because that's what Chazal say. It was one shifcha, it was one maidservant, a non-Jewish maidservant. We'll explain her status in a second. That was the captive. And then Am Yisrael's reaction is Vayidar Yisrael neder Hashem vayomer. Am Yisrael made a neder to Hashem, right? Neder is hard to translate. They oath, swear something, right? A neder really means a tremendous power that a human being has, that I can change the status of anything, right, with my words, right? If I make a neder that I will not, whatever, eat caviar or something, if there is kosher caviar, I think there is, or something like that, and I really make it, that becomes forbidden to me, just like any other forbidden food. It's not forbidden to somebody else, but to me it is. It creates a spiritual reality. So here they said, Vayomar, and Am Yisrael said, singular. Pay attention also here that Am Yisrael, good evening, that Am Yisrael is speaking in a lashon that's singular. They said, if to Hashem, if you will give this nation into my hands, and I will then dedicate all the spoils of war from their cities to Hashem. Right? I'm not going to take it for any personal use. And Vayishma Hashem, B'kol Yisrael, Hashem listened to the voice of Am Yisrael. Now pay attention to that phrase. We're going to explain it more in a second. Vayishma Hashem B'kol Yisrael. It's the only place in Tanakh that Talmud Rebbe pointed out that you find such a phrase, because Vayishma Hashem L'kol means he heard their cries, he heard their voices. Vayishma B'kol means he listened to them, like when we'll say, I listened to my wife and I took out the garbage. Meaning he listened to what they said. Right? They said, Hashem, right, if you give this into our hands, we'll make this, and he gave them into their hands. Okay, we'll see where that power comes from, and that is the story. So the Shem Mishmuel explains why Am Yisrael made a neder. I mean, it seems we don't see it in all the other places of war, right? We see if Amalek attacks, you go to war against Amalek. The Plishtim attack, go to war against Plishtim. Why do you have to make this neder? So the Shem Mishmuel explains like this: Nira she'oz hayu Yisrael shavurei leiv ma'od. Am Yisrael were very broken-hearted. Shemes Aaron, because Aaron had died. Right now again, right? Aaron had he had done so much for Am Yisrael. He had done so much in every aspect. Right? They say even so many children were named Aaron as a result of the shalom bayis that he made from couples that were on the verge of splitting up and got back together again. When they have a child, they would name Aaron. And the Medrash says that there were thousands of children named Aaron walking behind his mita. So he says, and they lost the Anene Kavod, and they hadn't come back. Which, as we said, is a terrible thing. You're in the desert and suddenly the Anene Kavod are gone. He says, Shahari mitzad heder Anene Kavod bavi lochem im Yisrael. And they realized, why did Amalek come and attack now? Because they didn't have their, so to speak, force field. Right? The shield was gone. So they were very down. They were very depressed. V'odzos, she's gabru v'shavu mehem shevi. And also that Amalek had the power to take a captive. It is very relevant. It says, Ke'inim b'milchemes Ai. Okay, there was a battle in Sefer Yoshua, the Battle of Ai, and there, Hiku Anshe Ai ki shloshim v'shisha ish. So the people of Ai caused 36 casualties in Yoshua's army. What was the reaction of Bnei Yisrael? Vayimas levav ha'om vayihi l'mayim. The people's hearts melted and turned to water. I mean, we don't want losses and everyone is a great tragedy. Why such a powerful reaction? He explains, because in the Milchemes Mitzvah of Yeshua, the Ramban says, a hair shouldn't have fallen off of any soldier's head in a battle that's a Milchemes Mitzvah of Am Yisrael going al pi Hashem to conquer Eretz Yisrael. That showed them there that something was very, very wrong. So here, right, this was one shifcha, this one maidservant, and I'll explain in a second, as I said, the status of the maidservant. So mikom makom hirgishu b'zeh shiflus matzavam. When they saw that happened, that this young woman was kidnapped, they realized to what a low state they must be in. So what do you do when you're so down? Fascinating thing. Their eitzah, their plan was to go in the opposite direction, le'echoz b'dargim gavohin, to grab onto a high level. Okay, that's what the neder represents. The neder is, as I said, something very powerful that each of us has inside of us. We can create a halachic reality with our statements. Awakening that power is awakening the deepest Jewish identity that we have. So he says, She'oru b'kirbam es hanakuda hapnimi shebelibam. They awaken that inner point of kedusha that's inside of their hearts. V'kofzu l'nedarim, and they jumped and they made this neder. Now, why do we say that a neder is something that's so high? He says a neder. He says it's known that its source is in what's called the Shar Hanun. There are 50 Shari Bina, 50 gates of understanding. So neder, he says, is a lashon nun dar, right? That which dwells in the 50th gate. So he says that's what they tapped into. That's what they awakened. It's a very strange reaction. And he says, in fact, the Medrash says, Vayidar Yisrael, right? It's a singular lashon. Vayidar, not Vayinodru, right? Am Yisrael, that they all made a neder. He said, who is that? The Medrash says, Yisrael Saba. This expression, Yisrael Saba, doesn't just mean Grandpa Yisrael. It means that aspect of Yaakov Avinu that exists inside of all of us, right? That's the idea that inside everyone, that's also we say when you say Shema Yisrael, just as the Shvatim were saying to Yaakov Avinu, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, one of the perushim of what we say is we're saying to that aspect of Yaakov Avinu inside of us, that we are still Neman, right, to that Achdus. So he says, this is the aspect of Yisrael Saba that they awakened. So here he says, okay, this is sounding very lofty, but he said this is actually a real practical thing, and you have to be careful how you do it. He said, Zer limud la'adam hamargi shafel matzavo, shfal matzavo. When a person feels really low, meaning he feels that he's sunk to a very low spiritual level, and Hashem even showed him so by events happening in his life, he says, Yaseh lehepech. He says, don't say, okay, who am I to do this mitzvah? Who am I to do this? He says, you go in the opposite. Yochaz davka begavoa mimenu. Grab at that time something which is above your usual reach. He says, b'tosefes koach va'ometz. Put in extra effort. Put in awakened powers inside of yourself that you didn't know that you have. Remind yourself of who you are and where you come from. And he says, this is what I heard in the name of the Chidushei Arim, the first Ger Rebbe. So he said it in Yiddish, right? He says, Ha'olam Omrim. There's a saying that people say, As mekenish ta'ribe muzmin arunter. If you can't go over, you got to go under. But the Chidushei Arim said, Vani omer lehepech. He says, I say the opposite. As mekenish arunter, if you can't go under, meaning if you're down, if you're low, muzman aribir, right? Meaning, don't think that the high road is closed off to you just because you're down and low. That's exactly where you go. Go to the high road. Now, I was trying to fit that in together, and I spoke with a Lubavitcher friend of mine, right, it being the very end of Gimel Tammuz here, because there's a famous slogan in Chabad, right, which, so he gave me the history of it. He said it's a saying that was said first by the Rebbe Rashab, right, who I think was the fourth Lubavitcher Rebbe, and it was transmitted by his son, the Frierdiker Rebbe, what they call Yosef Schneerson, and that was, he said, the world says, right, that you go, if you can't go under, you go over. I say, the chatchila river, start high, right? Start by going over. And this became like a battle cry in Chabad. They say this story, my friend said he didn't know if the Rebbe actually said this or not. They used to say Tashlich in a place called Prospect Park in Brooklyn. Okay, and they would arrange with the city that they would go. There was like by the lake there, something, it was a fence, which was locked off, so it was supposed to be opened for them. All the Lubavitchers coming out from the Shul and Crown Heights to Prospect Park, and the gate was locked. So they're all standing there, and suddenly the Rebbe climbs up over the gate, right? The version I'd heard was that he said, the Chatchila Rebbe, and they all, just went over the gate or something like this, meaning, right, that when you're facing that block, so you go to the high road. But here, it's talking about something, like you said, something very important. Don't think that when you're low, you have to go low. When you're low is the time to remind yourself that you have a connection to that which is very high. That's what Am Yisrael were doing there. In the most dispiriting situation, in a situation where they lost so many things and they were disheartened, suddenly they did an act that reminded them of the power that they had and who they were. Now, the Talmud Rebbe speaks about the same little Parsha here, and he added in the following. He says that we find, right, the only place in the Torah, in the Tanakh, in fact, where we find this phrase, Vayishma Hashem b'kol Yisrael. Hashem listened to the voice, b'kol, which means he listened to what they told him to do, so to speak. It's hard to even phrase the words, right? Not l'kol Yisrael, but b'kol Yisrael. Okay, so how did Am Yisrael reach such a power? So he says it's their reaction to what happened. The Medrash which said that this Shevi, this captive, was one Shifcha Kananis. Now the status of a Shifcha Kananis, a non-Jewish maidservant, or an Eved Kanani, first of all, just to clear the air, right, there are many accusations out in the world about Jews being cruel to non-Jewish slaves, during, the 1700s, 1800s, probably before that as well, etc. And many people accuse them of being at the center of the slave trade, which wasn't really that true, but for sure, there were Jews that were involved. But any cruelty, which, if it was historically accurate, is definitely not according to halacha. Meaning, an Eved Ivri, you have to treat him almost like your boss. They say you get a master for yourself. But an Eved Kanani as well. Cruelty is not allowed. Right? Mistreating him is not allowed. And they get this very strange in-between status that they're obligated in some of the mitzvahs, right? Basically the same, even a male Eved Kanani is obligated in the same mitzvahs that a Jewish woman is obligated in. And if they become free, then they complete the process and they're fully Jewish. So this Shifcha Kananis was in this strange state. The Rambam describes it. It says that ha'avodim she'igbilu osam l'shem avdos. They go to the mikveh when they become an eved. They become part of that family, and we see there are even things that they can eat that have kedusha. If the head of the household can eat that, v'kiblu aleim mitzvos she'avodim chayavim b'hem, and they accept the mitzvahs that the avodim are obligated in. Yotzu miklal ha'akum. The Rambam says they're no longer considered non-Jews. V'lichlal Yisrael lo bo, but they're not considered part of Klal Yisrael yet. And yet, Am Yisrael went to war against Amalek. That was a real war, right? They had experience with Amalek for this. Why? He says that the power that Am Yisrael had there was Achdus. The power that they had was the Achdus that came from the care of each and every Jew for that Shifcha Knanis. He said the fact that it touched them, and it touched all of them, and everyone felt that she should not be allowed to remain in captivity, right? Even though, right, as it says, she wasn't fully Jewish. Nonetheless, they were prepared to go to war with everything that means in order to save her. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu saw this achdus that Am Yisrael had, going out to risk their lives at war for this Shifcha Knanis, then Vayishma Shem B'Kol Yisrael. That is such a tremendous power that HaKadosh Baruch Hu helped them in their war and, so to speak, listened to what they asked. So he extrapolates it also. It says in the Zohar Kodesh that Amalek is also the Yetzer Hara, and a person has to care about everyone. Certainly, when he was writing this, we didn't have that reality so much of Jewish captives sitting in captivity as we have right now. Many, not just one. But also he says people that are captive of the Yetzer Hara, right? Sometimes a person, a Jew, has drifted far from the identity or got, entrapped into negative behaviors from a very powerful enemy, the Yetzer Hara, who is there. Rather than write such a person off, rather than look down on such a person, rather than anything like that, a person is supposed to have, it's supposed to touch their heart. And they're supposed to care about the fact that a Jewish neshama is not where it's supposed to be. And we're always supposed to be aware of that and thinking of it and trying to do what we can. Okay, so again, that is just very appropriate, I think, again, for Gimel Tammuz, that the Lubavitcher Rebbe was certainly known for that, of caring for Jews of any type, any point, any way, and what could be done from them everywhere. I'll tell you a fascinating story. The Rebbe said he heard it from the Pnei Menachem. And the Pnei Menachem heard it from a man from New Zealand. This was the story. There was a Jew from New Zealand whose daughter moved to America. This is in the 1950s, I think. 50s, maybe early 60s, before the Lubavitcher Rebbe became Rebbe. His daughter moved to America, and she was living in Crown Heights. He took the big trip from New Zealand to visit his daughter. And the building that his daughter lived in happened to be the same building that the Lubavitcher Rebbe's son-in-law, Reb Nachum Mendel Schneerson, later the Lubavitcher Rebbe, lived in. So he got into the elevator in the building, and the future Lubavitcher Rebbe got into the elevator. He said, Shalom Aleichem, where are you from? He said, New Zealand. He said, how's Yiddishkeit in New Zealand? He says, well, we have a fine shul, but in our city, we're having a hard time with the mikveh. Right? And he gave him a bracha, he should have success, etc. Many years later, right, the Lubavitcher Rebbe was already Rebbe. This gentleman came on another visit to America, and he gets online, the Lubavitcher Rebbe is giving out the dollars or such, and when he comes up to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, he says, you now have a mikveh in New Zealand. They got. So the Pnei Menachem, the previous Ger Rebbe, said, what impresses me about the story? Not the fact that he had a fabulous memory and he was able to remember this person that he met in the elevator for a minute. It's the fact that he cared about the state of the mikveh in New Zealand for 50 years or whatever it was. He said, that's what we have to remember. Okay, and that is something, it awakens that Yisrael Saba, it awakens that unifying point inside every Jew, and that's really what's supposed to happen in such cases.
There's a family in Baltimore.
Yeah.
That davened in Rabbi Schwarzer, the Yekish Shul.
Yeah. Glen Avenue.
They were called the Fruma Cones.
Yeah.
Why were they called the Fruma Cones?
Yeah.
Because Baltimore was below the Mexican Dixie. They had slaves.
Right.
So this family had slaves, and it was known in Baltimore that they were exceptionally nice to them.
Oh.
So they were called there was a family, the Fruma Cones.
Beautiful. That's good to know. That's the reputation we should have, right, if we had these things. Okay, now, how does this all tie into Parshas Chukas? This is the this is the leap we're going to try to do.
Yeah, that's one of the great.
Parshas Chukas, Zos Chukas HaTorah, right, referring to this mitzvah of Parah Aduma. The Shem Mishmuel says, right, it was just in the next year, about a powerful aspect of unity that's there, davka, in the mitzvahs that are called chukim, the ones that we can't explain to other people. We can't give some kind of rational explanation. It doesn't mean that there isn't reasons for the mitzvah. Every reason has a mitzvah. Yeah, but if they ask you, why can't you wear wool and linen? Why can't you eat pork? Why can't you eat this? Say, Hashem told us to. Okay, it doesn't mean we don't learn Tamei mitzvahs what we can, but that's the bottom line there. So he said like this. The Parshas Parah is located in a very strange place. It's here in Parshas Chukas. This is the end of Am Yisrael's time in the Midbar. They're about to go into Eretz Yisrael. But in reality, he says, on the second year, on the second day of the first month, the first day of the second month, the Parah Aduma, the first Parah Aduma was prepared. It was burned, the ashes were burned. They needed that because they brought the Korban Pesach. So why is it being written down here at this point? Many Mefarshim give many reasons for this thing. He explains the following. He says, Eretz Yisrael, in our world, Lamata, is like Malchus Shamayim above. So he says, Kabbalas O Malchus Shamayim, accepting the yoke of the Malchus of heaven, of God's kingship, so to speak, means to do what he says without basing your performance on your investigations of whether you think it's the right thing to do, not the right thing to do, if you understand the reasoning for it, you don't understand the reasoning for it, right? He says, and even if it's something you do understand the reason for it, that's not why you do it because the king said so. Okay? It's nice that you have an understanding of it also, but that's the way you do it. That's what's called to do it with temimus, with a certain wholeness. And he said, nonetheless, it's covered HaMalchus. The king also wants you to try to understand his commands. That's why Am Yisrael have this fascinating mix. On one hand, we do what Hashem says because Hashem said. On the other hand, our very way of learning is asking questions. We ask and we dig, and we fight and we look and we try. And that's also the covet of the king. Right? The king says something. Don't you want to know what I said? Don't you want to understand? You said shake the lulav. Okay, I understand you're shaking the lulav. Don't you want to know why? Right? What am I trying to tell you with the lulav? All these things. So we go deep for sure. But bottom line, we do it because of that. Okay? So he says also, to inherit Eretz Yisrael, which is like the Malchus Shemayim down here, you need this meat of what's called temimus, of this wholeness, simplicity, not implying simple being something negative. A beautiful thing Rav Hutner once said. He wrote in one of his letters, he said, people make a mistake when they think that the comparison of little to big is the same as the comparison of what's called in Hebrew, pashut to murkav, simple and complex. It's not true. He says, because if I have a little bottle of Coke and I have a big bottle of Coke, the big bottle of Coke has everything the little one has, plus more. But he says, something complex is missing the mila of simplicity. There's a mila of pashtus, of simplicity, that a person has to learn, right? And Dafka, someone who's involved in very deep learning and thinking, has to be reminded of what a special thing it is to be that Poshet Jew. So Avram Avinu, when he was sent to Eretz Yisrael, it was exactly that way. Lech lecha me'artzecha miladcha el haaretz asher erecha. Avram Avinu, pack up, leave everything, and start traveling to a place I'm going to show you. Okay, even though he didn't know what, where, or why. Okay, and the same thing is with the Bris Milah, right? That it's when he told Avram Avinu about the Bris Milah, he said, right? Ani Hashem asher tzisicha mirkastim loseis lecha es haaretz hazel sarishta. Right, you will inherit this land because of your leaving or casting with that tmimus. And with Milah it says, Hishalech lefonai vayeh tomim. Walk before me and be tomim. Have this wholeness, this simplicity. Ibn Ezra says, what's the connection to Milah? He says, don't ask why we do the Milah. Right? Meaning, try to learn about the Milah, but asking why means, I want to decide, should I do it, should I not do it? Can you explain this? The Ramban says, it's like Tomim Tiyeh Mashem Elokecha, right? That you come and you take that. That is the key for Yerusha of Eretz Yisrael. Why? It says because the Yerusha of Eretz Yisrael is not for individuals. It's only for the Klal of Am Yisrael. Okay? It's only Mitzad HaKlal. Kibush Yochid Lav Shmei Kibush. When an individual decides to conquer some piece of land, some country, someplace, some island, that doesn't make it part of Eretz Yisrael. Okay? He says, now, when it comes to performing mitzvahs that we understand or think we understand, everybody's different. Some people have deeper understandings. Some people have more superficial understandings. Some people have more correct understandings or wrong understandings. Okay? And therefore, we're all individuals when it comes to that. But when it comes to a chok, the idea of a chok, he says, guess what? We're all one. I don't understand. You don't understand. He doesn't understand. Why are we doing it? Because the Melech said. The biggest chacham, why is he doing it? Because the Melech said. The ignoramus, why is he doing it? Because the Melech said. Chukim unite us. He says chukim are the most pure expression of that idea of all of us do this, bottom line, for the same reason. All of us are Avdei HaMelech, and that is the nation that becomes unified and is able to come and to take Eretz Yisrael. Okay, now he brings a fascinating connection. He says, when you look at Shabbos, we have two forms of the mitzvahs of Shabbos, Zohar and Shomer. Zohar is the positive aspects of Shabbos, right, which we expressed in the idea of Kiddush and all these things, but Shabbos is meant to do things, right? Shabbos is meant, and we have Shomer. Shomer are all those malachas, all those things that we don't do on Shabbos. So he says that Shomer, it says in the Zohar HaKadosh, is the midah of night. Why? Because that's the first thing we do on Shabbos. Meaning, as soon as the sun sets, we all start keeping Shabbos because we all stop doing malacha. That's the first thing. Then you start to do your Zohar. And that happens every place in the world. As the sun sets, everybody stops doing malacha. Right? Again, the wise man, the simple man, everyone, we all do. And in not doing, so we're all on the same level. Right? Later, when the big Talmud Chacham learns Hilchos Shabbos, and when he sings the Chadori with all the kavanas with the Arizal or something, okay, he's doing his thing, and I'm just trying to stay awake in shul, and I like the tune. Different strokes for different folks. But when it comes to the not doing, at that initial moment of Shabbos, he said, that's Raza the Shabbos, Raza the Echad. That's the secret of Shabbos. That's the oneness, that we all are there, and we all have this idea of we don't do. Okay, so he says, and that's nothing gradual. That happens like this. It's a jump, kind of like what he said about the jump of the nether. Okay.
Why doesn't it say Shomer v'Zochar?
What in the Zemer? Yeah, because what was first in the first Dibros in Yisro, it's Zochar, I think, and in Vayischanan it's Shomer. You're right. So it doesn't go according to the chronological order of night and day. You got to figure out those two parshas why. So I just want to finish by reading to you. I saw in the Sefer that was talking on Chukas, a Marimokum that I'd never seen before. Not a Chiddush that I haven't seen many things, but in the Rambam in Hilchos Me'ilah, okay, the laws of Me'ilah are very complicated. When you have something that's dedicated to Hekdesh, the question is, when you use it for your own purposes, right, when have you transgressed this thing which is called Me'ilah? All sorts of complex stuff. Which things, who does it, if I ask someone else to do it. And it's dafka when, b'shogeg, when I don't even know what I'm doing. So the Rambam, and it's very important to remember that this is the Rambam, right, writes like this. He says, Roy la'adam lisbonin b'mishpetei Torah Kedosha. It's befitting for a person to look deeply into the laws of the Torah Kedosha, v'leida sof in yonom, and to try to get to the bottom, so to speak, of their matters, kvi kocho, according to your abilities. Something that you don't find a reason for, and you don't know any cause for that. Don't treat it lightly. Right? He's paraphrasing by Har Sinai that it said you have to stay a fence, and you don't start climbing up to the Har Sinai because you'll be hurt. He said, don't think about these mitzvahs the way you would do about any of your regular pursuits. I don't understand it. I'm not doing it, right? Something. No. It says, look here in these halachas, we just had 8 prakim of detailed hilchos me'ilah. The Torah was so machmir. And this can apply to wood and stone and dirt and ashes. Kivan shenikra shem odon ha'odom aleim. once the name of Hashem is called upon these things, when they become hekdesh, bidvarim bilvad, just by words, like we said, a person can say this is hekdesh. So then niskadshu, they have this status of hekdesh. Whoever treats them as a regular day-to-day thing, ma'al b'Hashem. This is almost a rebellion against Hashem. Afilu hayashogeg, even though you did it by accident, you need kapora. So he says, kal v'chomer l'mitzvahs, if that's the way it is for a piece of wood that has Hashem's name on it. Kal v'chomer to the mitzvahs of Hashem, right? He says, therefore, right, you should not think about them just as these things. Okay, so he goes on about this more and more, right? If you want to look, the very last halacha, Hilchos Milah, and the Kesef Mishnah has a very beautiful, tiny comment on this. He says, Divrei Rabbeinu udrochav emunah v'hem re'uyim elov. He says, the ways of Rabbeinu, the Rambam, right, his ways are faithful, and what he writes here is befitting for him, because that's the way the Rambam didn't approach it. Okay, so that's the idea of the chukim, of how to approach those things and to realize the power of them. And like they say, zos chukas haTorah, even those mitzvahs that we think we have that explanation for, there are always aspects of them that are deeper and deeper and deeper that get into the world of chok. That's what unites us. That's what puts us all on that same level. So between that and between caring for each other and each person, hopefully we can get it together and be able to be zocher to the Eretz Yisrael, Kadosh Baruch Hu wanted to give us in the right way, B'mehera V'yameinu.